All right, so this is going to be a test of the audio coming from my AirPods, as well as to try to get more comfortable with being on camera. So I'm making this for my Epic Compilations page. If you have any tips, tricks, or ideas, leave them down in the comments below. But we're going to start out with some random facts, move into conspiracy theories, and then strange laws. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We've got some random facts here, like Superman didn't always fly. The original comic book Superman could leap tall buildings in a single bound, but then he had to come right back down to Earth because he didn't fly. It wasn't until the 1940s when animators for a new animated series decided it would be too difficult to routinely draw him bending his knees that it was decided that Superman could take off into the air. Readers got to see smooth animation, and a superhero gained a new power. I never knew that. I thought Superman could just always fly. How about you? What do you think about this one? The first computer was invented in the 1940s. These days, supercomputers are everywhere, and they really don't need much space at all. Have an Xbox One posted up in your living room? That's a supercomputer. A laptop tablet hybrid in your bag? That's a supercomputer too. Don't even get us started on the thing in your pocket. But when supercomputers first came around, they needed much, much more space. Just take a look at the world's first one, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, ENIAC. Originally built in the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering, in 1946, ENIAC weighed 60,000 pounds and took up a room larger than most studio apartments, 1,500 square feet. Shortly after construction, the ENIAC was sent off to the military, where it was used to calculate ballistic trajectories with frightening accuracy. Today, computer experts at Penn credit ENIAC with heralding in the dawn of the information age. Space smells like seared steak. When you see footage of astronauts floating peacefully in space, do you ever wonder, what does space smell like? Well, according to some former astronauts, space does have a distinct odor that hangs around post-spacewalk. They've described it as hot metal or searing steak. The longest wedding veil was the same length as 63.5 football fields. When Maria Braskeva, a woman from Cyprus, got married in August 2018, her goal wasn't just to say "I do," she was also determined to set a record. My dream as a child has always been to break the Guinness World Record title for the longest wedding veil, she explained. She fulfilled her dream by wearing a lace veil that stretched 22,843 feet and 2.11 inches, or as long as 63.5 football fields. I gotta say, that's a long wedding veil. I think that would cause more trouble than it's worth, more problems. I mean, could you imagine being the one having to help her carry that around, and God forbid she needs to use the bathroom? The unicorn is the national animal of Scotland. While Scotland proudly boasts the Loch Ness Monster, one of the world's most famous fabled creatures, the country opted to make another mythical beast its national animal, the unicorn. Although this might seem like an odd choice, Visit Scotland explains that unicorns played an integral role in the country's history. Back in the 12th century, William I used the proud beast in the Scottish royal coat of arms. Bees sting other bees. Bees are notorious for their stings, but humans aren't the only ones who experience this pain in the neck, or the arm, or the leg. In protecting their hives from outsiders, some guard bees will stay by the entrance and sniff the bees that come in, says Marianne Peso from the biology department of Macquarie University. If there's a rogue bee from another hive trying to steal some nectar, the guard bee will bite and even sting the intruder. Kids ask 300 questions a day. A 2013 UK study from online retailer littlewoods.com observed observed young children and recorded the questions they asked the adults around them. The children tended to turn to their mothers for answers, and these moms could end up answering an average of nearly 300 questions per day, or one question every 2.5 minutes, the study found. The moms reported that the hardest question they were asked included, "Why is water wet?" and "What are shadows made of?" The total weight of ants on Earth once equaled the total weight of people. Entomologists have estimated that there are at least 1 million trillion insects, and only 1% of that number is ants, according to the BBC. And if you took all those ants, about 10,000 trillion, and put them on one side of a giant scale, you could almost put all of the people in the world onto the other and balance things out. Unfortunately, as humans have become heavier, this probably wouldn't hold up today, but it once did. Francis Ratniks, professor of apiculture at the University of Sussex, told the BBC this might have held true around 2,000 years ago. E is the most common letter and appears in 11% of all English words. Try writing out a few sentences, anything at all. Now take a minute to look how frequently each letter in the alphabet appears. Chances are you'll see a lot of the letter E. That's because the commonly used vowel appears in around 11% of all words in the English language, according to Oxford dictionaries. The next most popular letter was A, which appears around 8.5% of all words. The least common letter is Q, which appears in just 0.2% of words. A dozen bodies were once found in Benjamin Franklin's basement. But were you aware of the fact that multiple skeletons were found in the basement of Benjamin Franklin's London home? The bones were discovered during a 1998 renovation of the house and were identified as being from nearly a dozen people, including 6 children. The most plausible explanation is not mass murder, but an anatomy school run by Benjamin Franklin's young friend and protege, William Hewson, wrote The Guardian. It's not to say there wasn't any funny business going on. The resurrection men could deliver bodies stolen from graveyards to the Thames Wharf, at the bottom of the street, while there was a weekly public execution at the gallows on the other side of the garden wall. The healthiest place in the world is Panama. A small valley near Vulcan in Panama has garnered the distinction of being the world's healthiest place to live, according to a 2018 report by International Living. Called Shangri-La Valley, the area is home to beautiful scenery, a low cost of living, and a significantly longer life expectancy than the surrounding areas. All in all, the world's healthiest areas have some common factors. According to the ranking, a warm climate, active social scene, healthy food, and a slower pace of life that makes for less daily stress. A pharaoh once lathered his slaves in honey to keep bugs away from him. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt were believed to be literally divine. The word pharaoh itself means great house, as in the house of God. In fact, King Pepi II, who supposedly ruled for 90 years, thought so highly of himself that when he was bothered by insects, he would command that one of his slaves be covered in honey to lure the flies away from himself. Some people have an extra bone in their knee, and it's getting more common. If you are under the impression that the human body had finished evolving, think again. It turns out that some people have a bone in their knee called a fibula. And while this particular little bone with an unknown purpose was once fading away, over the last century and a half, it's gotten more common. Back in 1875, nearly 18% of people examined had a fibula. That number dropped to 11% by 1918. However, by 2018, 39% of individuals had this mysterious bone. Pringles aren't actually potato chips. The next time you see a can of Pringles, take a closer look. You won't see the word chip anywhere on the packaging. That's because Pringles aren't made of thinly sliced potatoes, but instead dehydrated potato flakes pressed into their signature parabolic shape. That's what makes them less greasy. But when other potato chip manufacturers complained, the Food and Drug Administration ruled that Pringles couldn't be marketed as chips. The company eventually settled on Potato Crisp. There's a giant fish with a transparent head. The deepest levels of our oceans are some of the least explored areas of the planet. Because of the extreme pressure, cold, and the dark at these depths, only the... This one's a hard one to read. Only the very strangest of creatures can survive there. These include giant tube worms, vampire squids, goblin sharks, and viperfish with teeth so long that they can't close their mouths. Perhaps the strangest, though, is a barreleye, a large fish with a completely transparent head. There's a decorated war hero dog. While in the trenches of World War I, the U.S. While in the trenches of World War I, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division found themselves unable to communicate with other troops because shell fire had damaged the telephone wires. A young private came up with a unique solution. Rags, a mixed breed terrier whom the soldiers had adopted in Paris, would carry the messages from one division to the next tucked into his collar. He saved many lives, and when Rags passed away in Maryland at the very advanced age of 20, he was buried with military honors. Showers really do spark creativity. Showers aren't just good for your hygiene, they're good for your creativity too. For a 2012 study published in the journal Psychological Science, researchers gave volunteers creativity problems to solve, followed by a period of rest. During that period, some were assigned demanding tasks, while others did simpler tasks that allowed their minds to wander, just like a shower does. Those doing the simpler tasks during the resting time were more likely to solve the original creativity problems. Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard left his post at Ford's Theater to go for a drink. You already know that Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth while watching a performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. on April 14th, 1865. But what you might not have known is that the president had a bodyguard named John Frederick Parker with him on that fateful night, according to Smithsonian. Unfortunately, Parker was a police officer with a less than stellar reputation. After arriving 3 hours late for his shift, the officer left his post protecting the president to get a drink at the Star Saloon next door to the theater. It was during this time that Booth entered the box seats where Lincoln was sitting and shot the president. Dolphins have been trained to be used in wars. Dolphins are known widely as adorable, intelligent animals. What is not widely known is that these crafty creatures were used largely by U.S. and Soviet Union during the Vietnam War and the Cold War. Both countries studied the creatures for their sonar capabilities, but also trained them to detect mines, bring equipment to divers, and find lost equipment and guard submarines, amongst other nifty tricks. Playing the accordion was once required for teachers in North Korea. The most popular instruments in North Korea is the accordion. So much so that all teachers used to be required to play to get their teaching certifications. Because the accordion is portable in a way that, say, a grand piano isn't, it was thought of as the people's instrument that could be taken outside and played for laborers in the field. Children's medicine once contained morphine. If you were a baby in the middle of the 1800s and you cried while teething, your parents might have given you Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. This medicine claimed that it soothes the child, softens the gums, and allays all pains. It may have done plenty of soothing, but it was also extremely dangerous. This concoction, like many patent medicines of the time, contained morphine. Plastic Easter eggs, and plastic Easter grass were invented by a man who holds more patents than Thomas Edison. If you've ever enjoyed an Easter basket with plastic eggs and grass, then you can thank Donald Wetter, the man who invented both. Wetter not only holds the patents on these holiday staples, he also holds a total of 1,413 U.S. patents, including ones for water-based inks, flower pot covers, and decorative wrappers. That's compared to Thomas Edison, who held just 1,093 U.S. patents. Water makes different pouring sounds depending on its temperature. If you listen very closely, hot water and cold water sound slightly different when being poured. The heat changes the thickness or viscosity of the water, which changes the pitch of the sound it makes when it's poured. What we feel as heat comes from the molecules of water moving faster. Cold water is thicker and therefore makes a slightly higher pitched sound. Most laughter isn't because things are funny. Every culture in the world laughs, but surprisingly, most of our laughter isn't necessarily a response to humor. Less than 20% of laughter comes after jokes, according to neuroscientist Robert Pravin. The rest is a reaction to regular statements and questions like, "How have you been?" The ensuing laughter, however brief, helps form social bonds since people who laugh together grow together. One man has saved more than 200 people from suicide. It's a sad fact that the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is a site where many suicides take place. However, one California Highway Patrol officer has done more to combat this problem than any other individual. Officer Kevin Briggs, who battles depression himself, has personally talked to more than 200 people down from the proverbial ledge throughout his career. After retiring in 2013, Briggs wrote a book called Guardian of the Golden Gate, and now goes on speaking tours to encourage public discussion of suicide and mental illness. Our European ancestors were cannibals. In 16th and 17th century Europe, cannibalism was actually a fairly common practice, and it was all for medical purposes. The practice seems to have been started because Egyptian mummies were thought to have magical curative properties, so they were ground up and put in many remedies. As the idea evolved, human bone, blood, and fat were all used as medical concoctions. Got a headache? Crush a skull and make it into a tea. While medical cannibalism has fallen out of favor, modern medicine still sometimes uses one human body to heal another in the form of blood donations, organ transplants, and skin grafts. Dogs actually understand some English. Some owners of disobedient dogs may have trouble believing this, but dogs can learn to recognize a vocabulary of about 165 words. Unsurprisingly, dogs respond best to short words as well as words with hard consonants like T or R, which may explain why they can hear treat from 3 rooms away. If you want to try to expand your dog's vocabulary, be consistent. For example, always call a meal dinner instead of breakfast, lunch, or supper. And don't believe the old myth. Old dogs can learn words just as well as young dogs. You have a nail in your body, or at least the components of one. Iron is an important nutrient that the human body needs. It helps your red blood cells carry oxygen, which is necessary for producing energy throughout the body. That's why an iron deficiency can present itself with feelings of exhaustion. Amazingly, a healthy adult has about 3 grams of iron, enough that, if it were pulled out and melted down, it could form a nail up to 3 inches long. Redheads aren't actually going extinct. Periodically, a rumor starts on the internet that says natural redheads will become extinct by the year 2060. Lucky for gingers everywhere, this is a myth. It's true that the gene that causes red hair is recessive, meaning that both parents must have it for their child to have red hair. However, even non-redheads can carry the red hair gene, and it can pop up unexpectedly in generations down the line. Pro baseball once had women players. While there are currently no female players in Major League Baseball, there have been plenty of women in professional men's leagues. The first was Lizzie Arlington, who pitched during the ninth inning for the Reading Coal Heavers in 1898 and won her team the game. A little over 30 years later, an African-American woman, Jackie Mitchell, pitched against the Yankees during an exhibition game, striking out both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. What's more impressive, Mitchell was 17 years at the time. Koalas have fingerprints. Chimpanzees and gorillas have human-like fingerprints, and so do koalas. In fact, koala prints are very similar to human fingerprints, even to expert crime scene investigators. As of yet, no koalas have framed humans for their crimes, but now we know what's possible. Humans are just one of the estimated 8.7 million species on Earth. Human beings may dominate the planet with our sprawling cities, far-reaching technology, but we are, in fact, just one species among some 8.7 million that live together on planet Earth. One 2011 study published in the journal PLOS Biology estimated that various forms of life on the planet include 7.8 million species of animals, 298,000 species of plant, 611,000 species of mushrooms, mold, and other fungi, 36,400 species of protozoa, and 27,500 species of algae or chromists. And it's worth noting that the researchers did not venture to put an estimate on the number of bacteria. Riding a roller coaster could help you pass a kidney stone. After multiple people reported they had passed a kidney stone while riding Walt Disney World's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad ride, a research team from Michigan State University decided to investigate the phenomena in 2016. They conducted tests with a model kidney and found that there was a 64% kidney stone pass rate for those seated in the rear of the Thunder Mountain ride. That number was just 16% for those seated in the front. Dinosaurs lived on every continent. Back in their day, dinosaurs lived on every continent on Earth, including Antarctica. The reason we only find their bones in certain places, though, is that weather and soil conditions in those places were just right for the bones to be fossilized. Scientists also speculate that there may be many smaller-sized dinosaurs that we know nothing about because their bones were too small to fossilize well. Bee hummingbirds are so small, they get mistaken for insects. Hummingbirds are known for being itty-bitty creatures, but bee hummingbirds are the teeniest versions of these shockingly tiny flyers. They're actually the smallest bird in the world. They are so minuscule that they are sometimes mistaken for insects, which explains their name. According to the National Audubon Society, the birds are just 2¼ inches long and weigh less than a dime. Sea lions can dance to a beat. There are only 2 mammals on Earth with the proven ability to move their bodies in time with an external beat. Humans, though not all humans do, to be fair, and sea lions. When researchers at the University of Santa Cruz rescued a stranded sea lion in 2013, they found that she was very smart and she was even able to learn how to dance. Though parrots can also keep a rhythm, it was previously thought that only animals capable of complex vocal learning could do this. Rolls-Royce makes the most expensive car in the world. Currently, the most expensive car in the world is a Rolls-Royce Sweptail that sold for $13 million. However, even if you have that kind of dough lying around, you won't be able to buy it. Only one was made, and it was custom built from the ground up, according to the buyer's specifications. But brand new custom cars have nothing on used classics. The recent sale of a 1963 Ferrari GTO for $70 million is supposedly the highest price ever paid for a car. The famed Typhoid Mary infected more than 50 people by cooking for them. Typhoid Mary was a real historical person who became notorious in the early 1900s. She was an Irish woman named Mary Mullan who immigrated to the United States in the 1880s. Though she had no symptoms of typhoid fever, she carried the bacteria in her blood and could pass it on to other people. Because no doctor could convince her that this was true and she didn't feel sick, she insisted on working as a cook. During her career, she infected at least 51 people, 3 of whom died, before she was isolated and in enforced quarantine for the last decades of her life. The legend of the Loch Ness Monster goes back nearly 1,500 years. There's a tale written in the year 565 AD that speaks of an Irish monk traveling through Scotland. While there, St. Columba heard stories of a water beast that attacked and killed the local people when they went in the river. Wanting to help, the monk used his friend as bait to lure the beast into sight, at which point Columba commanded it go on further, and the creature stopped and swam back upstream. That river is now known in Scotland as the River Ness, which flows out from the famous Loch Ness. Nutmeg can be fatally poisonous. A little dash of nutmeg in a pumpkin pie or on your eggnog can give it some extra flavor and a lovely spicy scent. Too much nutmeg, however, can be toxic. 2 to 3 teaspoons of raw nutmeg can induce hallucinations, convulsions, pain, nausea, and paranoia that can last for several days. Actual fatalities are rare, but they have happened. Chinese police use geese squads. You've heard of police dogs, but police geese? As of 2013, 12 police stations in rural area of China have begun to use geese as sentries. They are alert animals and, as you probably know, can create a lot of noise and commotion. Which creative Chinese law enforcement officers are taking advantage? Another hard one to read. Which creative Chinese law enforcement officers are taking advantage of? While this trend has yet to spread throughout China, Dongguan police claim that these geese have already stopped at least one theft. The first iPhone wasn't made by Apple. The first mobile device to be called an iPhone was made by Cisco, not Apple. It allowed the user to use voice functions of Skype without a computer. Apple announced its own product just 22 days later, and Cisco sued for trademark infringement. The lawsuit was ultimately settled out of court, and both companies were allowed to keep using the name. However, you've probably never heard of the Cisco iPhone. There's a country where twins are most likely to be born. Benin, a country in Central Africa, is notable for having the highest birth rate of twins in the world. While the world average is just 13 twins per 1,000 births, Benin more than doubles that rate at nearly 30 twins per 1,000 births. There's no single factor that causes this, but genetics, diet, and even the mother's height are thought to play a role. The Comic Sans font came from an actual comic book. Most adults nowadays who know anything about graphic design steer away from using the Comic Sans font in formal documents. The font was designed by Vincent Connare, who drew direct inspiration from his favorite comic books, including Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' celebrated Watchmen series. For 100 years, maps have shown an island that doesn't exist. Almost nothing is known about Sandy Island, a landmass about the size of Manhattan in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Australia. Supposedly, explorer James Cook discovered it in 1876, and it began appearing on nautical maps in 1908. It wasn't until 2012, when a team of Australian scientists set out to survey the island, that they discovered there was no island there at all. The scientists guessed that Cook may have in fact spotted a pumice raft, a floating volcanic stone and gas. The Sydney Morning Herald even published an obituary for Sandy Island. Babies are physical anomalies. Babies, particularly newborns, are surprisingly different from the children they'll grow up to be. When they're born, their heads account for a quarter of their full body weight, and the size of their brains will double in the first year of life. babies have 300 bones and around 10,000 taste buds all over their mouth. Some of the bones will fuse as they age into 206 as an adult, but the taste buds on the tongue will eventually vanish. But the taste buds not on the tongue will eventually vanish. The Queen has some hidden hideaways. Since the early 13th century, the City of London has officially paid rent to the Crown for 2 small pieces of property. Fortunately for the city, the price has stayed the same for more than 800 years. 1 knife, an axe, 6 horseshoes, and 61 nails, presented every autumn in the ceremony of quit rents. Although one of these properties is located in the moors in Shropshire, and the other is near the Royal Courts of Justice in the city itself, no one knows the exact location of the Queen's land. The man who wrote Dracula never visited Transylvania. Bram Stoker, who was an Irish author who is now best remembered for his gothic horror novel Dracula. Partially set in Transylvania, a mountainous region in central Romania, the story cemented the legend of the vampire in mainstream European and American culture. Despite Stoker's many world travels, he never visited Eastern Europe, and by virtue, Transylvania at all. The Australian government banned the word mate for a day. There are probably slang or informal words that get on your nerves from time to time, particularly when you think something should be taken seriously. In 2005, Australian Parliament took a few citizen complaints a little too seriously and banned anyone on their staff from using the word mate while at work. Fortunately, Prime Minister John Howard objected, claiming that mate was an important part of the Australian culture, and the ban was overturned within 24 hours. Many languages have the same roots. English, Portuguese, Latvian, Pashto, and Greek all sound very different today, but these languages all have a common ancestor called Proto-Indo-European. Though we don't have any written examples of it, linguists have worked backwards from a variety of modern languages to try to reconstruct it. Using their reconstruction, the sentence, "The king wanted a son," would be written H3REKS SUHXNUM ULNH1TO. That would be hard to read. A tick bite can make you allergic to red meat. Plenty of people have food allergies, but few are the result of an insect bite. In a strange and growing trend, some people who get bitten by the Lone Star tick can develop a sudden allergy to red meat. Beef, lamb, and pork, which are technically classified as red meat, can make people with this allergy experience headaches, sneezing, a runny nose, and nausea. In severe cases, it can cause the person to be unable to breathe. For some sufferers, the allergy fades over time, but for others, it's permanent. Harriet Tubman was even more heroic than you thought. You probably know that Harriet Tubman was a former slave who became a political activist for the abolition movement. But in addition to smuggling escaped slaves through the Underground Railroad, during the Civil War, she was the first woman to lead an armed assault. She planned and executed a number of raids and was known to carry a revolver for personal protection. Tornadoes can cause fish rain. Tornadoes can develop over water just as well as they can over land. When they do, they're called water sprouts, and they suck up large amounts of lake or seawater, as well as whatever's swimming in that water. If the water sprout travels onto the land and winds decrease, there's nowhere for those fish to go but down. As far as we know, there's no tornado powerful enough to pick up sharks, but a fishnado is entirely possible. Napoleon was once attacked by thousands of rabbits. Napoleon Bonaparte was once one of the most powerful men in Europe, but he suffered an ignominious defeat at the hands or paws of rabbits. After a military victory, Napoleon's chief of staff organized a rabbit hunt to celebrate. Thousands of rabbits were brought in to be set loose, but instead of hopping away when the cages were opened, they turned to attack, swarming the partygoers. After trying and failing to shoo them away, the great Emperor Napoleon ran for the safety of his carriage. Star Trek's Scotty stormed the beach at Normandy. Canadian actor James Doohan, the best known for playing Montgomery Scotty Scott on the original Star Trek series, served in World War II with the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. As a commissioned lieutenant, he led his troops up to mine-strewn Juno Beach as part of the Allied forces' D-Day invasion. Later in the day, he was wounded by friendly fire that caused the amputation of the middle finger on his right hand. You might not have noticed it because during his time on Star Trek, directors did the best they could to avoid showing the injury on screen. Apple pie isn't actually American. Apples originally came from Asia. The first pies were baked in medieval Europe. Even the concept of putting apples in pie traces back to a recipe from England in 1381. Nevertheless, the phrase, "as American as apple pie," turned up by 1924 and became a common saying during the years of the Second World War. Pigs are constitutionally protected in Florida. First written in 1838, the Constitution of the state of Florida guarantees the rights to privacy, the freedom of speech, and the right of pregnant pigs to be free from cages. Unlike many crazy or outdated laws, this amendment is recent, passed in 2002, and comes from a well-meaning place, the prevention of cruelty to animals. During pregnancy, a pig must not be caged or even tethered such that it can't turn around freely. Mr. Cherry breaks all the records you've never heard of. Japan's record breaker for most records broken is Cherry Yoshitake, a children's entertainer who goes by Mr. Cherry. In 2018 alone, Mr. Cherry set 1-minute records for the most pairs of underwear pulled on, 36, the most baked beans eaten, 71, and the most apples bobbed, 37. Sweat doesn't actually stink. You might notice that any sweat you produce right after a shower doesn't smell so bad. That's because your sweat itself isn't stinky. The bacteria on your skin that breaks the sweat down that causes the odor. Additionally, you'll find that the sweat on your arms and legs doesn't smell as much as your armpits. That's because the sweat glands in your armpits secrete more protein into a dark, damp environment, the perfect place and food for bacteria. Some planets produce diamond rain. Saturn and Jupiter are gas giant planets that produce a truly unique form of weather. Recently, scientists discovered there is plenty of carbon in these atmospheres. When carbon soot gets hit by lightning, it hardens into graphite and falls downward, where the pressure of the atmosphere hardens it further until it becomes a diamond. Storms on these planets may literally rain diamonds as big as a centimeter across. Sharks can live for centuries. Greenland sharks are known to be some of the oldest living animals in our world. Researchers did carbon dating on a Greenland shark that was caught in 2014 and found it to be around 392 years old. Further testing revealed that our fishy friends could be up to 500 years old. Yes, that would mean that our geriatric friends would have been alive when Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. There's an entire town under a rock. If you've ever been accused of living under a rock, you'll feel right at home in Centenil de las Bodegas in Spain. Many of this tiny town's 3,000 residents live and work. The Bermuda Triangle isn't any more likely to cause a mysterious disappearance than anywhere else. This area in the North Atlantic Sea is also called the Devil's Triangle because it is an area of the ocean that stretches between the tip of Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. It has been thought to seemingly swallow up ships and aircrafts. Explorers as far back as Christopher Columbus have reported odd occurrences, like fireballs in the sky, that turned out to be meteor crashing. but historians, scientists, and the U.S. Coast Guard have proven that vessels are no more likely to disappear in the Bermuda Triangle than they are anywhere else in the ocean. Many prior disappearances have been demystified as remains of numerous wrecks were discovered or explained by weather patterns in the area at the time. There's a world record and a happy ending for the greatest distance thrown in a car accident. This is one world record you may not want to try and top. A car traveling 70 miles per hour struck Matthew McKnight, an off-duty paramedic, when he stopped to help out with an accident on the side of an interstate in 2001. He was thrown 118 feet, almost half a football field. Dr. Eric Brader, his emergency room physician, told McKnight he should send it to the Guinness Book of World Records, but McKnight brushed it off as a joke. Brader was so impressed by the feat that he sent in the paperwork anyways, which was approved in 2003, but didn't make the cut until its 2008 edition. You can sneeze faster than a cheetah can run. Clocking it at 100 miles an hour, we can sneeze faster than cheetahs run, 4.5 times faster than Usain Bolt's record, and 20 times faster than Michael Phelps. Unfortunately, we also expel about 100,000 germs when we sneeze. The first hydrant patent was lost in a fire. The fire hydrant patent is credited to Frederick Graff Sr., who was the chief engineer for Philadelphia Water Works during the early 1800s. Unfortunately for Graff Sr., the patent was destroyed when the patent office in Washington, D.C. burned down in 1836. After 100 years, retired firefighter George Segalakis reinvented the hydrant after they had been failing to work in too many critical emergencies. Saudi Arabia imports camels from Australia. Saudi Arabia is known for its vast expanse of desert, so it may seem unbelievable that they rely on Australia to supply them with the animals that dominate their landscape. Australia originally had camels imported to be used for transporting heavy loads or for riding. They were let loose when their work was done, causing an unwanted spike in their populations. Australians then sold the camels back to desert-based countries like Saudi Arabia, which used camels at much higher volume. One man once survived 2 atomic bombs. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both nuclear attacks to Japan when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs during World War II. Yamaguchi, sent to Hiroshima on business on August 6, 1945, saw the U.S. drop the first atomic bomb. Miraculously, he survived with burns across his face and arms, but made it home to Nagasaki. 3 days later, the second atomic bomb hit, flattening Yamaguchi's home. Because his family was out finding ointments to treat his already existent burns, they were safe in a tunnel and miraculously survived as well. The cast of Friends still earns around $20 million each year. When the show came to an end, the cast of the popular TV show Friends negotiated syndication rights for themselves. That means they receive a percentage of the revenue, 2%, from reruns airing across all broadcasting companies. Since the much-loved TV show still pulls in around $1 billion of revenue, Courtney Cox, David Schwimmer, Jennifer Aniston, Lisa Kudrow, Matt LeBlanc, and Matthew Perry all make major dough each year for doing, well, nothing. 20 million is the estimate. Pluto technically isn't even a year old. Pluto was discovered on February 18, 1930. It is the farthest dwarf planet from the Sun, requiring it to go around much further distance than we are used to here on Earth. It takes 248 Earth years for Pluto to complete one rotation of its own around the Sun. This places Pluto's first birthday since its discovery on Monday, March 23, 2178. Cows kill more Americans each year than sharks do. While sharks account for about 53 bites per year, only one of those ends up being fatal. Cows, on the other hand, or hoof, kill around 20 people per year. Newborns don't have kneecaps. This belief is only a half-truth, as babies actually technically do have kneecaps when they're born. Those knees just aren't hardened yet and remain soft cartilage throughout their childhood until they eventually turn into bone. In Germany, people help toads cross the road. You might not want to bring up the popular video game Frogger in Germany. There, they like to protect their frogs, toads, and other amphibians. In order to save them from harm when crossing the street, conservation organizations installed more than 800 fences along popular roadways. Along these fences are buckets, so when they try to cross, they eventually hop into one. At the end of the day, wildlife conservationists collect the buckets and release frogs across the road into nearby forest with ponds and lakes. Cheetahs don't roar. Cheetahs can't roar, but they can purr, meow, hiss, bark, and growl instead. This type of behavior is much like the domestic cats we keep in our homes. France has a dozen time zones. The country with the widest stretch of land, Russia, spans 11 different time zones. France, though, technically has the most, clocking in at 12. But that's due to the fact that its territories are dispersed in various parts of the world. The U.S. ties with Russia in second, but not all time zones are inhabited. So, Russia is the only place in the world where one citizen could be waking up at 8 a.m. and another could be going to bed at 11 p.m. Humans aren't the only species to adopt. We've seen the heartwarming videos of dogs nursing a baby squirrel back to health, and that's actually much more common than we think. It becomes mutually beneficial to have more furry friends in the group to take on other roles in survival, whether that be hunting, gathering, or just simply cute companionship. Though the phenomenon isn't completely understood, it's clear that both humans and animals have an instinct to care for others. Now on to strange laws. Vermont banned banning clotheslines. You read that right, or heard that right. In 2009, Vermont made it illegal for groups like neighborhood associations to ban clotheslines. You can't throw rocks at trains in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a law that you cannot propel any stone, brick, or other missile at any railroad train. I think this means that you can technically drop a brick onto a railroad train, but no one's ever tested it. In Arizona, you cannot manufacture or distribute imitation controlled substances, which I guess is why they didn't film Breaking Bad there. Blasphemy is still illegal in Michigan. Blasphemy laws used to be very common in the United States, but there are still some in existence, including in Michigan, where cursing God is a misdemeanor. Dogs can't hunt big game mammals in California. Allowing dogs to pursue big game mammals, such as bears or bobcats, is illegal in California. We were surprised to learn that this was an issue because our office dog runs away from squirrels. Although, to be fair, they are larger than her. Don't bite while boxing in Utah. Bad news for Damon Salvatore and Mike Tyson. Boxing in Utah cannot feature any biting. Swearing at sporting events is illegal in Massachusetts. If you're over 16, it's against the law to swear at players or officials during sporting events in Massachusetts. So I guess at the end of the day, every Red Sox game, 37,000 people are taken into custody. You can't use a false name at a hotel in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, it's illegal to check into a hotel using a false name. Pretending to be a religious figure is illegal in Alabama. At public places in Alabama, you cannot pretend to be a minister, nun, priest, or rabbi if you aren't one, thereby making productions of The Sound of Music technically illegal, unless the nuns are played by nuns, that is. Back to random facts. Blue Ivy Carter is the youngest person ever to appear on a Billboard chart. In January 2012, Jay-Z released his hit, Glory, a dedication to his firstborn child, Blue Ivy Carter. The rapper decided it would make sense to have her featured on the song, so he included a clip of her crying before the track ends. Because her dad officially credits her in the song's title, she became the youngest person to ever have a Billboard hit, at a mere 2 days old. The majority of Americans choose dogs over love. The majority of Americans choose dogs over love. Dogs have been known for the longest time as man's best friend, but Americans are increasingly taking that to a new level. A 2017 study from Rover.com conducted over 3 years found that 54% of dog owners are willing to end a relationship if their pup doesn't like their partner. The study also found that 94% of dog owners consider their dogs to be a part of their family, and 78% include their pups in major family moments. Since 1 in 4 people said they bring their cuddly companions on first dates, maybe consider bringing dog treats instead of flowers next time. Star Wars was expected to be a flop. The original 1977 Star Wars had a budget of $8 million, which distributor 20th Century Fox was reluctant to give director and writer George Lucas, so he adopted a lower salary in order to keep the budget. The movie went on to make $775 million around the world, and Disney picked up the entire franchise for $4 billion. For comparison, Star Wars The Last Jedi, which was released in 2017, had a reported budget of $317 million. Your liver can regrow itself in 3 weeks. The Greeks had it right with Prometheus, as it turns out. According to Greek mythology, the Titan was punished by having an eagle eat his liver day after day. The liver would regrow at night, leaving Prometheus at the bird's mercy. Turns out, the regenerative properties of this story are partially true. Doctors have found that the liver can regrow in 3 weeks, not 1 day. Danes once bred a pig to look like the flag. In the early 20th century, those who resided in North Frisia under Prussian rule were not allowed to raise the Danish flag, but some crafty North Frisians took action by breeding a pig known as the Danish protest pig to be red in color with a large white stripe around its belly, thus creating an animal version of the flag. As they technically did not break the law, and because it wouldn't have been feasible to ban the breeding of pigs, the Danes successfully protested Prussia. A 70-year-old woman once completed 7 marathons in 7 days across all 7 continents. Chow Smith was always an avid runner, and in 2017, she decided that for her 70th birthday, she would complete 7 marathons in 1 week across all of the continents. Traveling made it challenging. For example, Smith made the race in Egypt just minutes before the start because her plane to Cairo was delayed. But despite the obstacle, she completed her goal. Dogs like squeaky toys for a dark reason. Ever wonder why your little puppy obsesses over those squeaky toys? Because dogs are descendants of wolves whose instincts include hunting smaller animals. The sounds a squeaky toy makes is very similar to the sound a small animal makes when being hunted. When old Lassie hears that, she gets excited because of these killer survival instincts. The man who founded Atari also started Chuck E. Cheese. In 1972, Nolan Bushnell started the gaming company Atari, which gave us the classic arcade game Pong. Bushnell sold the company just 4 years later, and the following year, he opened Chuck E. Cheese. In fact, there is one game in Chuck E. Cheese that actually is called Ping, a knockoff of his original arcade game, which he couldn't use since he no longer owned it. One man was once constipated for nearly 2 months. In 1965, 26-year-old Angus Barberi, who weighed 456 pounds, was put on a fasting program. It wouldn't be ethical to conduct a study like this today, but at the time, things were different, allowing Barberi's doctor, William Stewart, to experiment. On a strict regimen of multivitamins and minerals, Barberi got his nutrients without eating a scrap of food, which resulted in nearly 2 months of constipation. By the end of the year, Barberi was 180 pounds. Note, fasting to this degree is not recommended as it can lead to serious health conditions. Most people break up on Mondays. Searching through public Facebook data, Lee Byron and David McCandles found that relationship statuses changed for the worse 2 weeks before Christmas, around Easter, and on Mondays. Though this data may be somewhat misleading, as people might not be live updating their breakups, it shows an obvious trend. Thomas Hargrove has been archiving homicides for years through his Murder Accountability Project. Through his experience, he came up with an algorithm that found patterns in recent unsolved murders linked to at least one other murder through DNA. This allowed him to estimate the number of unsolved cases in the U.S. at any given time. According to The New Yorker, he believes that the number of active serial killers in the U.S. is around 2,000. Beethoven could still hear after going deaf. Upon going deaf, Beethoven discovered that if he bit onto a metal pole that connected to the piano he was playing, he could hear almost perfectly well. This process is called bone conduction, and while technically has evolved, the science is the same. While technology has evolved, the science is the same. Vibrations are transferred from the conductive metal into our bones. When this happens, our ears pick up the signal with no sound distortion. Ants have built-in Fitbit. While previous research has found that ants use visual cues, a 2007 study discovered that desert ants have an internal pedometer that helps them keep track of their travels and find their way back home. Stressed men have altered proclivities. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Plus One found that men who are feeling stressed out prefer women with curvier figures. The study had one experimental group perform stressful activity, while the other control group did not. Afterward, they were shown pictures of women with various body types. When the men in the control group were asked to rate the women on a scale of 1 to 9, they rated pictures of women with higher BMIs as the most attractive. Crows hold grudges. In 2010, researchers in Seattle found that formerly captured crows were able to remember the face of their abductor even years after the incident. Once they identified the suspect in question, they would threaten them by diving down and swarming the person that they had felt threatened by years before. Canada once heavily targeted LGBTQ individuals. Our Canadian neighbors may not have been as friendly as we thought. During the Cold War era, Canada spent thousands on its historic fruit machine. This device was supposedly able to identify gay men and lesbian women by monitoring subjects as they were shown pornographic images with homosexual content. This, unfortunately, led to the wrongful persecution of many of Canada's fine citizens. In 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologized for the mistreatment of these men and women. Bill Gates has donated nearly half of his fortune. Microsoft founder Bill Gates encourages the Giving Pledge, a notion that if you are fortunate enough, you should be giving 50% of your wealth to those who need it most. As of 2013, he has donated $28 billion and has saved around 6 million lives by bringing vaccines and better health care to people worldwide. You can always see your nose. The human brain is capable of amazing things, but in order to do those things, it needs to block out distractions through a process called unconscious selective attention. The nose is one of those distractions. In his landmark 1960 study, Ulrich Nasser discovered this phenomenon after he asked participants to count the number of times basketball players passed a ball in a video. What the large majority failed to notice in the video was a girl walking through the middle of the court with an umbrella because they were so focused on the counting. A restaurant in New York employs grandmas as chefs. It is true that everybody thinks their Italian grandma, or nonna, is the best cook around. So it was a genius idea when Joe Scarvella decided to gather up as many nonnas as he could to work in his restaurant in Staten Island. Enoteca Maria combines the skill of these delightful, talented grandmothers and has them create and cook recipes from their own family cookbooks. Shaq only ever made one three-pointer. Shaquille O'Neal made the only three-point shot he would ever make in his entire career on February 16, 1996, when the Orlando Magic played the Milwaukee Bucks. O'Neal received an almost full-court pass before he shot the three-pointer. Despite being the only official three-point shot in his career, he went down in NBA history as one of the greatest of all time. America's first bank robber deposited the money back into the same bank. At the Bank of Philadelphia on August 1, 1798, a sum of $162,821 was stolen from the vault. There was no sign of forced entry, so it was thought to be an inside job. Patrick Lyon was imprisoned as the prime suspect, as he had been the carpenter that worked on the vault doors. But then they realized a man named Isaac Davis had been depositing large sums of money into the Bank of Philadelphia. As it turned out, he was one of the robbers involved. In 1799, Lyon was freed, and Davis only ended up repaying the money without serving time.